Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to CBI at 10. My name's Liz Mosley. I'm an editor and partner at Tortoise, and we're here with you this morning, joined by, I want to say, the CBI All-Stars from the devolved nations to have a proper deep dive and examination of what is going on in the various parts of the United Kingdom in relation to the COVID response, the immediate handling of the pandemic, and the particular and precise issues that are affecting in particular Northern Ireland and Scotland in the last part of the webinar. As we often do, I will kick off this morning with Matthew Fell. Hello again, Matthew. How are you doing?
Hi, Liz. Good morning, everyone.
Matthew, why don't you get the ball rolling with a sort of opening gambit on the sort of latest announcements, the last 7 days, what's happened, what do we need to know about that's new?
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Liz, and good morning again, everyone. So let me give a quick update maybe on testing, on international travel, on some of the financial support measures we're calling for, and then maybe pull all of those threads together into the latest in our thinking for a roadmap for reopening the economy. So maybe to start off with testing, we had some announcements in England over the weekend that the government is extending its support for workplace testing. So that can now reach smaller businesses. The threshold was previously 250 employees and above. That has now come down to 50. And there is a portal live on the gov.uk website. The web address, I think Alice will pop in the chat function. Get-workplace-coronavirus-tests. People can register on there. The criteria is you need to be a business registered in England, that you employ 50 people or more, and your employees can't work from home. So it's suitable for those businesses. And what you need to do there is enter the name of the company, your company registration number, and an email address, and you're good to go. For companies employing less than 50 people, the route is still through your local authority. So that looks like it is encouraging news and continues the push to get more workplace testing going on in England. Please do continue to share your experiences and drop us a line on those as we continue to improve that service. I was chatting to a company yesterday who had got an experience that was going fantastically in one part of England, but their other location and site not so good. So we can iron out those wrinkles as well as tackling the sort of who pays question for tests in the long run.
Matthew, just before we move on from testing, that's really helpful. The tests that I do my registration on the link that Alice has just put in the chat. I say how many people I employ. I get a batch of lateral flow tests. Is that what happens? They send them to me.
That's it. Essentially, you'll have some interaction with the team there to make sure that everything's all sort of checked and you're set up properly and so on. But then, yes, you get government-provided lateral flow tests to be able to do that in the workplace.
And do we have a sense of how long these tests will be free for and when I might expect to have to pay for them?
Well, I think the current commitment that companies are embarking on this is through to the end of March, and then we're working out where we go from there. But that, I think, is the current state of play that companies are being told who register for this service.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Matthew. And your next thing was international travel.
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit of an update from yesterday with further restrictions and enforcement measures. Those are kicking in from Monday next week, so the 15th of February. As a reminder for people, already we have no entry to non-UK residents from so-called red list countries. You need to provide proof of a negative COVID test if you are coming into the country no more than 3 days before departure, and the self-isolation piece on arrival. That has already been the case. The update from yesterday is that there is going to be a requirement for further COVID tests on both day 2 and day 8 of quarantine, as well as a so-called quarantine package that's available for hotels and testing at a cost to individuals, and some quite tough financial penalties and fines for non-compliance there. Now, clearly, I think from our point of view and the business perspective, everybody gets the health imperative, and absolutely, if these measures help us to return to some degree of normality sooner, that is a good thing. But we shouldn't underestimate, I think, just how challenging it is for the aviation sector and the broader industries that rely on that. I was speaking to some of those, and if you take the major airports in England, so the Manchesters, the Heathrows, the Gatwicks, and so on, government support covers something like less than a sixth of their total costs at the moment, and they're running at tiny fractions of their usual sort of business, clearly. So a real reiteration and call there for further immediate support in that sector. And then finally, on that point about financial support and the budget, that is clearly 3 weeks away today when we'll hear from the Chancellor. We have got some immediate asks out there, both to extend the job retention furlough scheme through to the end of June, at least, to lengthen the repayment periods for VAT deferrals, and to extend some of the business rates holidays. So those are a package of measures designed to both protect jobs and also to help companies' cash flow while restrictions are still in place. We're also expecting to hear a bit more about the medium term as well. Some coverage and speculation out this morning around the Chancellor's plan for growth that I think will really focus on skills and investment in light of Brexit, COVID, net zero challenge, and so on. Very much in line with some of the thinking that we set out with Tony Danker's economic vision speech last week. So a lot going on there, Liz, and actually it really all comes together in this thought we have around a roadmap for reopening the economy to bring that all together. We talked a little bit about it last week for those people who joined us then. Since then, the CBI has run a series of virtual rooms with our members right across the country, as well as our regular one-to-one conversations with our members, probably touching about 200 firms in total since we last spoke. And the purpose for this roadmap we see is really twofold. One, to really understand the things that firms most want to know to help their planning when the time comes to reopen, but also, I think, to get the insights from those firms into government that can help the government's own planning and thinking for how to go about this. So it's a bit of a win-win situation. Some of the key messages we had coming back so far are really, one, companies absolutely want to know the plan and the sequencing rather than a specific date. They'd find that really helpful in its own right. Second, I think for many companies, this will vary sector by sector. The ideal lead time, so they can gear themselves up for a successful reopening, is 2 weeks. Many can go faster, down to about 48 hours, and some have said, look, give us the choice and we'd scramble around and make it happen tomorrow. But in an ideal world, the 2 weeks point. And then the third message that's come through loud and clear is just how much so many businesses would prioritize schools reopening. I think something like 1 in 4 businesses are saying that is probably the thing that would make one of the most significant differences to their business, because they've got so many people grappling with the challenge of homeschooling, childcare, and so on, as well as juggling working from home. So those are the messages coming through. And I think what we're really working with the government now to understand, we had some calls on Monday, got further ones planned for later in the week, just to understand, in a sense, some of these thorny issues that we could tease to. So what does a sort of COVID secure workplace 2.0 look like when we get round to reopening, so firms can get ready for that? What should I be thinking about in terms of the vaccine and my staff? Should I be informing them? Should I be encouraging them? Should I be compelling them? Probably not is the answer to that, but helping people understand that with some clear government guidance, as well as further developments around how do I engage with testing and what more does that enable me to do in the workplace. All those and many other issues are what we're really looking to tease out in this roadmap. And again, please do continue to give us your insights on what will be most helpful to map through in that.
Thanks ever so much, Matthew. Before we move on to the devolved nations representatives, I just wanted to go back to quick questions on testing that have come through from people who are submitting questions in the chat. Firstly, if the rule has been sort of reduced to, you can get the free lateral flow test if you employ 50 or more people rather than 250. So that's good news until the end of March. Does that count for contract and freelance staff? Is it the person who's sort of the contractor, if you like, or is that the sort of recruitment agency that you might have gotten through? Which bucket do you fall into in that scenario?
It's a tricky one. In fact, I was just chatting to one of the companies working on this yesterday. And I think particularly you can imagine a situation where they have people coming onto both their site, but also other sites as well, for example. So they're sort of contractors working with multiple companies. What tends to happen in those situations is they're requiring it for anyone coming onto their site. So they're using their supplies, if you like, of the testing to make sure that it's not just their own employees, but people coming onto site who have to do that. That will be a little bit company specific, depending on the setup, the frequency of those visits, who else they're testing with, and so on. So that is part of the dialogue, I should say. Companies should have with the Department of Health and the advice they're getting with their local authorities. But that is how it seems to be playing out for a number of the firms that I've talked to.
Okay, great. And then another one just before we move on, a question from Jonathan Dunn on travel restrictions. And what's the CBI's view on how long the length of the quarantine? One of the biggest challenges we face is how quickly and how often the rules change. So do we have a sense of if what we know today is fixed for this many weeks, this many months? Any sense of that?
Yeah, no specific guidance. And I think actually, but there's answer the question, Jonathan, it's actually really quite tricky for us to sort of take a view or make a recommendation on exactly that. I think we sort of understand you've got to be a bit driven by the health data. And clearly the government and others are more privy to that than we are. I think our role is firstly to say, just so that help everyone buy into the regulations and so on, share the evidence as much as possible. It's a similar message that we've had with some of the other COVID restrictions and so on. I think bring people with you in your thinking by sharing that evidence base, I think is really important. And then secondly, get the support in place for people who are impacted by that and the companies that are impacted by that absolutely in lockstep. So if you've got the restrictions going on, you need to have the support measures. And then I think our only real message or guiding sort of light on the duration of those restrictions would be for a sort of the classic as long as necessary but as short as possible style application of it.
Yeah, okay, thanks ever so much, Matthew. I'm going to come to Tracy now, Tracy Black in snowy Scotland. Good morning, Tracy, nice to see you. Thank you for being here, because the situation in Scotland, even from some of the things that Matthew's just talked about, is quite different on schools, on testing and things like that. Just give us a sense of the picture where you are, and particularly the key differences from what we've just heard.
Yeah, of course. So I suppose we're still in national lockdown like the rest of the UK. Some good news though. So last week, the First Minister announced that as long as the numbers continue to fall, she will allow nurseries, primary 1 through to primary 3, to go back on the 22nd of February. Now that is going to be confirmed next week on Tuesday, when she's also going to give a general overview of their sort of strategic plan to reopening the economy. But there's no indication yet for sort of rest of pupils. There's some variations, like older pupils who need to come in to do coursework, but overall from primary 4 onwards, there's no indication yet of when they will go back. But certainly for people like myself with a 6-year-old, we're obviously delighted that homeschooling will be no longer, certainly for this period of time. Secondly, quarantine is different in Scotland. So we've seen this before, the First Minister going a bit tougher, a bit stronger. So any international traveller coming into Scotland will have to quarantine. So it's not specific routes, it's just if you've come in from overseas, you must quarantine. Thirdly, the lateral flow test. This is something that has, I think, upset quite a lot of our members. So Scotland does get an allocation of these lateral flow tests from the UK government. However, they've decided to not give them out to business. They're using them across other areas. So that has meant for some of our manufacturers, who are also going through a very challenging time anyway, having to do pay for private testing, and it's not cheap. There are some fantastic providers in Scotland who are doing this at cost, but even so, it can run to thousands of pounds. So I think it comes back to that. It just doesn't feel fair that in some parts of the country they get things for free, which are seen as a very good thing, as a measure to try and restrict the virus, and other parts of the country don't. So that's something we're going back to the Scottish Government to sort of see if they will review. And then third or fourth, I should say, final thing is around the strategic framework. This is what the Scottish Government uses to sort of plan out how it's going to reopen the economy and their approach to suppressing the virus. So this is going on in other parts of the country as well. We also wrote to the Scottish Government outlining the 6 steps we thought they should consider, and that was warmly welcomed. And we are working with them this week and next week on that. In Scotland, we talk about the 4 harms of COVID. So the first is health because of COVID. Second is health issues, but not related to COVID, and then the societal harms and the economic harms. And I think in this strategic framework, as we very sadly go into nearly a year of the pandemic, is will the weightings of those 4 harms change as the longer we're in lockdown. So I think it's something that everybody's going to be very closely watching and inputting, is at what point, and these are very difficult questions and challenges, but where do you put the support, and how do we get the economy reopening?
Do you have a sense, Tracy, of the rate of vaccination in Scotland? Is it on a par with what it's looking like in England? I mean, your shape of your distribution of your people is very different. Is it going as well up north?
So there has been a lot of press coverage about this, and there have been sort of tough questions being asked in Parliament. I think in the first few weeks, Scotland was seeing it as going slower, but we had sort of record numbers yesterday and this week. So I think now we really are sort of all getting in step, and that's what everybody is obviously wanting to see, is that the estimations are at the moment that by August, everybody in the over 50 categories should have received their second injection, and then obviously what we're now working with the Scottish Government is what do they decide for the rest of the population, what groups should go next? Is that teachers? Is it key workers outside the health service, etc.?
Forgive me, did you say by August everybody over 50 would have had their second
Yes,
dose?
that's the aim. Yeah,
that's the aim. Okay. Thanks ever so much, Tracy. If you have questions, as always, please do put them in the chat. If you want to ask a question anonymously, that's fine too. Just let us know. I'm keen to make use of the time as much as we possibly can. We're going to go over the sea now to Angela in Northern Ireland. Morning, Angela. How are you?
Morning, all good, thank you.
Nice to see you. So same sort of question. What's your situation? Are there differences? Are there consistencies? How's it going? Just give us a general sense of the picture, COVID-wise. How's it looking?
COVID-wise, the numbers are coming down, really good numbers yesterday. I think it was something like 245 people. It's the lowest number since October the 1st, so that's really successful. The vaccine rollout is very successful in Northern Ireland too. I think we've had 345,000 people out of a population of just over 1.8 million that have been, got their first dose. So that is going very, very well. The restrictions are very, serious restrictions going on in Northern Ireland, and they will stay in place apparently until the 5th of March. So I think they're going to be reviewed on 18th of February. But, very much stay at home, work at home, don't go out unless it's for essential reasons. Schools in Northern Ireland, primary and post-primary schools, have been told that they will be closed until the 8th of March. And, obviously that has big implications for employees who are trying to do the home schooling. Universities also online. All hospitality is closed. Non-essential click and collect is not allowed. Takeaways, though, are allowed up to 11 o'clock. And, they're still discussing the quarantine. They haven't settled on that yet, but it is something that they're currently discussing in the executive. I think in Northern Ireland, the biggest issue, for my members certainly is, we're seeing a good pattern in terms of where the infection rates are and the vaccine rollout, but we're not hearing the same rhetoric coming out of government. Like Tracy, I have also written to the executive in Northern Ireland, along with our Director General, Tony Danker, to ask for that roadmap. We need to have plans as to how we unlock the economy as things start to improve, and how we learn to live with coronavirus. Unfortunately, I think there doesn't seem to be enough bandwidth in the Department of Health in Northern Ireland to be having those discussions, which are urgently needed, with Department of Economy, etc. in the background. I get a sense that there's not particularly good collaboration going on, and that is a bit of a worry. As I said, that what we heard yesterday from the Chief Medical Officer, despite all the good figures and the good vaccine rollouts, this is a quote from, we have to be realistic that the current restrictions that we have in place will be in place for a significant part of this year, to a greater or lesser extent, and into next year as well. That just went down so badly with people that, it seems like nothing changes. When things improve, the rhetoric is still around restrictions and lockdown. And I think probably we need to really maybe be a bit louder about where is the evidence, and I think it's quite interesting what Tracy said about the 4 things that have to be considered, and there is a real sense in Northern Ireland that it is only health at the moment. I do know, because I have spoken to the Department of Economy, that they do have a plan. They are trying to roll out a reopening paper, but even within the executive, there's a lot of issues going on in Northern Ireland, and we'll get on to the protocol later. Having a coalition government trying to coalesce around a reopening strategy at the moment is really quite difficult. The Department of the Economy are trying it in the background, and certainly we're feeding into them, the evidence that, Matthew referred to earlier on about what sectors would like, etc., which they find really useful. And they've told us that our letter was really timely for helping them get a bit of weight and a bit of power when speaking to the executive. But
Right.
I'm desperate to see it delivered. So that's where we are. As I say, the stats are good on COVID, but the rhetoric from government is not in the same space.
Okay, thanks, Angela. And just a quick point of detail on the testing. Are the rules in Northern Ireland more reflective of the England testing rules, the in-work testing rules, or more like Scotland or something else?
I have the same problem as Scotland, and my companies in Northern Ireland are desperate because a lot of manufacturers have been very successful in finding people maybe who come back from self-isolation using the rapid tests, but they are expensive. They're between 12 and 30 pounds a head. Smaller businesses can't afford to do this, and you probably need to do 2 at a time to get a better result. There's tests sitting in Northern Ireland that have been rolled out, our 3% share, but they will be used by the health sector, and there's no indications that they're going to give support to businesses in Northern Ireland, and that's where we have a bit of a argy-bargy going on in the background about how that is going to be supported and how will not be different from England, or I think you'll hear from Wales there, and they have a better story to tell on this.
Yeah. Thanks, Angela. It certainly seems like that, again, is symptomatic of this disconnect between the health agenda and the social and economic agenda. Is interesting. Okay, thanks very much for the update. I'm going to come to Ian now. Ian, I know you've hot-footed it to this webinar from a call with the First Minister, so you've got some exciting new data that you can share, and we'd love to know what the story is in Wales, because the numbers in Wales are looking really very good at this stage.
Yeah, from sunny Wales as well, as I've got weather references. Not one snowflake in sight, to be honest with you. Yeah. It was the health minister and the First Minister, in actual fact, and I had to cut them short to join CBI members. So it shows how important the CBI members are to us. But yes, I've just come off a call, 45-minute call with the First Minister, and some of the data in Wales is really positive. We're down now to 110 infections per 100,000 in Wales, which is incredible when you think we were up around 600 not so long ago. Yeah. And 11 of the 22 local authorities in Wales are actually below 100 now. So yeah, it's really positive. There are some concerns, and in the areas where the infection rates are quite low, it does fluctuate. So there are some issues in West Wales at the moment where the infection rates are really low, but it only takes a few infections for it to appear as if it's going up. Yeah. So you've just got to accept that as the numbers come down, the levels they come down are slower, and they can fluctuate. So, but there's a sense of realism in Welsh government that is the fact. So nobody's pressing any panic buttons. The other great news in Wales, in actual fact, is the vaccinations. I know we got a fair bit of grief, or certainly the First Minister did in the early stages when he fatally said in the press that this wasn't a sprint, and he was criticised rather badly for it, and I felt really sorry. I think he didn't actually mean that, but in actual fact, as of last Sunday, in fact, Wales was vaccinating more people as a percentage of the population than any other country in Europe, and we vaccinated 600,000 people up to yesterday. And we were vaccinating at a really rapid rate at the moment. Right. But the First Minister did point out there's a challenge coming, because as of the 22nd, the people that have had their first jab will require their second jab, or the first few people, and that will start to feed through. Yeah. And he said that may cause some slowing down, but he said that was more about the number of vaccines available rather than specifically the capacity to deliver them. But it was an interesting conversation. We're fortunate in Wales that we have a pretty consistent dialogue with Welsh Government, and I meet the First Minister fortnightly and the Minister of the Economy on an ad hoc basis. So we're quite lucky. But in terms of testing, I think we're going to follow a similar system to what's being used in England, and I think there's an announcement later this week. And I think with regards to administration of those tests, the Welsh Government's going to run a series of webinars next week with regards to how they can be delivered. So I think it's lateral flow tests. I think they'll be providing them to employers. Going back to Matthew's point earlier about who, I think the view in Wales is that if you're on site, you're eligible for a test. So I don't think they're going to get into sort of any tangle about who gets a test and who doesn't. So I think that's the approach. Schools in Wales, foundation phase return on the 22nd. The foundation is the younger children, and then there will be an announcement of a phased return as part of that after the 22nd. Also on the 22nd, any students in further education who are studying vocational training, they can return as well on the 22nd, because obviously they're not getting the level of support they require. We similar to Angela and Tracy, provided Welsh Government with our version of the roadmap signed by Tony and myself, and that was referenced in the call this morning, and they were really pleased with that, and they see that potentially as a template moving forward. We did also I had a discussion with members yesterday around mental health, and the subject of mental health came up quite largely with the First Minister this morning, and I think there's a general acceptance now of the challenge that it's going to create for us going forward, and CBI are going to get involved along with the TUs and along with Welsh Government in trying to put some plan in place pre the exit from COVID, whatever that is, to enable us to deal with that, because there's a challenge in work and there's an out of work challenge as well. So these are the sorts of things we're working on with Welsh Government at the moment. But yeah, I suppose the infection message is good, but there are other concerns out there, and the impact it's having on the economy, quite obviously.
For sure. Thanks ever so much, Ian. I can't help thinking, having spoken to the four of you now, and this is reflected in a conversation that's coming from David Lonsdale, that the devil really is in the detail here. And if I'm a business owner operating in all four of the nations, it's very challenging that there are slight differences, but very significant material ones as well, between what I can and can't do, the help I can and can't access. Click and collect works here but not there. Do you think that there are, in general, perhaps if I direct this question to Matthew in the first instance, and maybe the rest of you can chime in, what are the lessons that can be learned from all of this? Because especially if what Angela was saying, that the likelihood that some restrictions, whatever they may be, will retain for, could be a year, it could be a year, some kind of restrictions. What can be learned to just make this simpler and to sort of ease that administrative and indeed stress burden on people who are trying to run businesses in these conditions?
Yeah, well, Liz, I think throughout the pandemic, all of us on this call have been sort of emphasising the need for coordination and consistency as much as possible. That has proven challenging, as we've just evidenced over the last half hour's chat, sort of thing. And of course, there's a sort of political reality that some divergence feels like it is almost inevitable, and so on. Where I think in particular, though, with our thinking on the roadmap could really help, and a sort of situation we get to, I think we completely recognise you're going to need to be driven by the different realities on the ground in whatever location you're on, and that's going to be driven by the health data. So you might need to go at different pace in terms of where we get to on these things. But I think a really nice medium to strive for would be if there is an overall sort of framework or approach that applies, and then has that local interpretation driven by what the situation is. Yeah. The more we could push in that direction as we get into the sort of roadmap for reopening and thinking about sort of future workplace guidance and so on, for me, that would be a really nice thing to aim for. And that would certainly seem to make sense from an economic perspective. We'll just have to see where that hits political reality, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, even if there could be some coordination on the timing of new restrictions or the easing of restrictions being shared, but it would help. We don't know. I think in England there's no specific known date of when the school's decision is going to be made and revealed. Am I right, Matthew?
Well, we're getting an update from the Prime Minister on the 22nd of February, I think, in terms of where things go next. So I think we'll hear more then.
So the day after half term, basically, they're going to say whether or not the schools are going to go back. Maybe we'll go back for a day again.
Well, I think it's broader than, I think it's a broader piece than schools. That it's actually the sort of the sort of wider reopening roadmap plan.
All right, thanks ever so much. I'm going to come, if I can now, in the last 15 minutes. If you have more questions on COVID and restrictions and things, please do send them in. But just in the sort of last portion, I'm going to come to Angela, if I can, to talk, and it is of course related. You can't unravel COVID from Brexit, particularly in your remit, Angela. But let's talk a bit about the Northern Ireland Protocol and ports and flow and how that is all working after the kerfuffle about 4 weeks ago. How's that looking now from your end?
Yeah, I mean, things had started to settle down a little bit, and we did realise that, you know, a lot of Northern Ireland companies were quite well prepared and ready for this, but there was a big job of work to be done in terms of the GB side. And, you know, we had those conversations with Michael Gove and promises, and actually, you know, sincere promises around working on the GB side to make sure companies understood what they had to do. But we just didn't see the curved ball coming in from the Commission in terms of the blunder that they did, what was nearly 10 days ago now. We just didn't see that coming. It was a mistake. It was poor judgment. I think the very poor road out of the vaccine strategy within Europe really drove the bad decision, a rushed decision. There was no consultation really. I think commissioners were given 30 minutes to look at the document. It got under the radar of the Irish Commissioner, Maria McGuinness, and there was no consultation with the Irish or the UK governments that this was, you know, going to happen. And, you know, obviously uproar and political capital was you know, really damaged as a result, and, you know, reduced trust as well. So I think, you know, there's lessons there to be learned, and I think we are learning them. I think on both sides there's agreements now around how we use the joint committee to make that protocol work. And it was good to see actually Michael Gove's letter that he sent in to the Europeans just earlier this week, I think it was, around the, you know, the need for collaboration, cooperation, and a little bit of flexibility, because, you know, companies haven't had a lot of time with regards to grace periods, and, you know, any extension on those I think would be warmly welcomed by businesses in Northern Ireland. Certainly the ball is in the Commission's court at the moment. In terms of operations, we've got the staff at Larne Port are now back in their posts today, actually. The police investigation around the intimidation of port staff turned up nothing really in terms of evidence about how credible that was. So there's lessons to be learned there in terms of, you know, where do we actually take our policy from, and it really shouldn't be from graffiti on walls. So, you know, that is the reality of it, and there's a lot of learnings in this. We're only 5 weeks into it, and the reality is, you know, companies want the protocol to work. It's not easy. I'd give you that. There's increased administration. There's still, you know, complications around things like rules of origin. But things are still flowing, and that's the reality. And even whenever the port staff weren't working, there might not have been checks on animals for a while, but actually all the documentation needed to be done and was being done in the background, and things were flowing. So I suppose for now, what we would really like is just a bit of calm, people to step back, give the protocol time and space to work. We are getting good support from the UK government, and we're pushing the Irish government as well around really trying to make it work. And as I say, we're waiting on the European Commission to come back. But, you know, there's a way to do these things, and it's through the joint committee, which has been set up with the UK and the EU to make sure that the protocol does work and does get smoothed out. And that's what we have to always revert back to, because it's there for a reason, and there at the moment, you know, there's no alternative to it. So a lot of political noise about that, and in some ways that does complicate other things. So trying to get to where there's political divisions on this, trying to get the politicians from different parties who are in a coalition government to coalesce around a COVID strategy around the opening of the economy. You can see why, you know, one thing does affect another thing, and things maybe aren't as, you know, smooth or as agile as what the business community would like.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. It certainly seems As you said before the call started, we were in the European Union for 50 years and we've had 5 weeks of trying to make this work. So we perhaps haven't given it enough of a runway. And my apologies for saying that the kerfuffle was a month ago. And in fact, it was only 10 days ago. That just goes to show how long this year has already felt to me. So
how much it's covered on the news. It feels like it's gone on forever. Yeah.
Thanks ever so much, Angela. I'm going to come to Tracy now because excitingly, I think it's right to say excitingly, there's COP26 looming on the horizon in November, I think it is, up there in Glasgow. Let us know how the preparations are shaping up. What are the key sort of things that everybody is sort of on tenterhooks and wanting that to be a success? I don't mean a success from an event point of view, although that too. I mean a success in terms of outcomes and commitments and what have you. What's the mood music around COP26 from your perspective?
Yeah, I think like obviously it was over a year ago, nearly 2 years ago, when we thought it was going to happen last year. And immediately we had members getting in touch with us across the UK going, how can we get involved? What's happening? And really the role of the CBI in this has been trying to sort of pool all the different interests and areas. You know, there's so many themes and topics. I thought, why don't I give you sort of an overview of how we're seeing it? And because I think what members really want to hear from us is what can I do? What are you doing? Where can I go? So we've sort of broken it into 4 key objectives, if you like. So one is probably 5 years ago, a lot of businesses saw climate change as a barrier or an additional cost, or this was going to be, you know, just another burden for them. And what we've really seen in the last couple of years is actually beginning to see the real opportunities behind it. So we're sort of talking about this objective about a race to the top. How can we in the UK and the United Kingdom really get behind climate change and sort of set the pace, if you like? The second objective that we feel the CBI can bring to this is showcasing the private sector. And this really ties in with what the Prime Minister and the UK government is, that there is so much amazing innovation going on in this area that UK companies are all over. Let's use this opportunity to showcase it. Third, it's no surprise, being the CBI, we also want to drive policy outcomes. So our infrastructure team, our innovation team, our people and skills team are all working and have actually, we've had those probably quite developed for a long time now, but it's really working with not just the UK government, but international governments about what are those policy objectives. And this year, actually, Tony is chair of the B7, which supports the G7. So it gives us a really good opportunity to take those policy ideas and that to the international community. And then the third one is sort of global consensus. And that's that role that the UK and Britain and British business can about getting us all to work together. Behind that, as I say, we could do hundreds of different bits of policy work on this, but what we're trying to do is bring it down to 6 policy areas that we're going to focus on. And that's energy transition, clean transport, I'm trying to remember them, sustainable finance, trade, digital and biodiversity. So if you're a company out there and you've got strengths in those areas, let us know. It's not to say we're not going to cover other things, but those are the sort of pillars, and they sort of tie in with the UK's and the United Nations pillars on it. And then I suppose the themes that we're sort of looking at and that we feel resonate with a business audience are drivers of change, of course. You know, what will it take for a business to invest in this new technology? If you're a garage or you're a you've got a whole load of equipment there for diesel and petrol cars, what's it going to take for you to start investing into EVs, for example? Very simple sort of example. But there's clean transport is obviously a really interesting one. We've got a huge aerospace sector. I know Heriot-Watt University are looking at this whole jet fuel. How do we get, from flying to buses to trains? We've got members trialing, hydrogen lorries and hydrogen buses. What are the barriers, if you like, and challenges in these changes? So we've also got things like climate initiatives, impacts on business activities, and the big one that's coming through is collaboration. And we've got lots of members who, even where they might be their competitors, are really wanting to come together and how can we work to solve some of these problems. So those are the sort of objectives, the areas and the themes, if you like, and then how can actually members genuinely get involved?
Yeah,
So we've got a national and we've got a local programme. So at the national level, we've got 4 key areas of activity. We've got the B7, which we're looking to do a summit in probably around May time. We've then got our 3rd Energy and Climate Change Conference, which I think is going to be June. We've then got our annual conference, which won't be all about climate change, but we'll have a big role in it. And then, of course, we've got the COP fortnight. So in all of those main events, we'll be looking for panelists, we'll be looking for speakers, we'll be looking for case studies, and they will all fall into, as I say, these areas that I've talked about in these themes. So again, if you've got somebody who's a great speaker and really strong on energy transition or clean transport, we want to hear from you. And then at the local level, our regional offices and the nations are going to have a program of events, and that will be using some of our existing committees and steering groups. So that could be the People and Skills Committee, it could be our FD networks, it could be our Government Affairs networks. And what we really want to do is hear what are the challenges and opportunities at a local level, because they're not all going to be the same. Obviously, if you're a construction company in Inverness, that could be very different to, a construction company building high-rise office blocks in central London. Yeah. So it's trying to get that input, if you like, across there. And then the other thing I just want to talk about, which is something that's really exciting that we're working on, is a platform called the Goal 13 platform, which we're doing with Deloitte and a number of partners. And that is bringing together, hundreds, if not thousands, of case studies globally. We've interviewed now over 200 companies. Our goal is to get to 1,000 by COP. And we've had some fantastic insights. And again, that platform will develop during the year to bring that collaboration piece. So not only can you put up what you're doing, some of the initiatives, some of the difficulties, because we want people on that platform also telling us, I want to do something, but I don't know where to begin. These are the issues I've got. It's not all about we're fantastic at it, it's everything. So that's a whirlwind of what's going on. We will be sending out communication to our members in the next 2 or 3 weeks of how they can actively be involved, because there is sponsorship opportunities, etc. there too. But really, you can drop me an email, or I say your local account manager or regional director, and they will be able to make sure that your interest is fed into the organisation. But it's really exciting, and it's one area that I do see the Scottish Government is as excited as the UK Government is, and we're seeing some good collaboration going on there.
Amen to that. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Tracy. I mean, it sounds incredible and definitely worth, a dedicated session in perhaps one of these forums, so we can really kind of unpick how we can get involved, how we can help shape the agenda. That would be fantastic. Our next webinar next Wednesday is on COP26. Oh, look at that. It's almost like we planned it. And first in a wider series that we're going to run on CBI at 10 called Countdown to COP. So there you go. We've just done our marketing nicely. There's 1 minute left, and I'm just going to whiz around, if I can, the panel just before we move away, just to sort of do a quick refresh for the specific nation that you represent. What are the sort of killer dates over the next kind of 2 to 6 weeks, the immediate term dates to watch out for in terms of announcements that may change the game? Ian, give us a sense of what are the dates of the diary that we circle in a red pen in Wales? Yeah,
as I said, 22nd of February is when we start to see the return of schools. The First Minister is quite clear about what he's going to do, and he has 3-week press conferences where he announces the latest phase. So we'll have an idea on the 22nd or leading up to that of what's going to be relaxed next. I think the general view is it's going to be schools, but I think there's some positive indications at the moment that we may see some relaxation by Easter, which is the beginning of April, and he's prepared to give 2 to 3 weeks notice of any relaxation he intends to give as well, so which is positive news.
Great, thanks ever so much, Ian. Angela, what are the dates to diary from Northern Ireland?
Yeah, well, on the 18th of this month, so we'll have a review of the restrictions, and then, as I say, they're going to be in place until March the 5th, so we'll see what changes on March the 5th, but we'll get a bit of an indication around that. Schools, unfortunately, still are remaining closed till March the 8th, but it will be interesting in April to see have we got our targets, because I think we plan to make quite good targets on the vaccine rollout by April. And then we have those other dates, around the end of March for supermarkets in terms of the grace periods for the movement of meat products until the end of June, and Pharmaceuticals have 12 months in terms of their grace period, but let's see the things change in between if we get any movement from the European Commission before that.
Great, thanks ever so much, Angela. 18th of Feb and then 8th of March, the sort of near-term ones. Tracy, in Scotland, do you have dates for the diary?
Yeah, the key one's next Tuesday, because we'll find out if the schools are going back or the primary schools are going back the following week. And also the First Minister should be outlining her initial thoughts around the strategic framework. So that will give us an indication if she's going to start what she's called her gradual easing of the restrictions in March. But like Ian, we have regular set periods of updates. So you sort of always know every 3 weeks, and we still have the daily press conferences. So they are quite good at keeping us up to speed.
Great, thanks ever so much, Tracy. And Matthew, I guess for England, we've already said the 22nd of Feb is the next sort of known date from the Prime Minister, and then I guess the budget on the 3rd of March.
Yeah, exactly right. A couple of key dates coming up there. And then, of course, Liz, we've been talking a lot about devolution this morning, including in the devolved nations. In England, the local and mayoral elections coming up as well. So we've been working hard with CBI members to put forward a sort of business plan for those as well. So plenty of key dates coming up.
Thanks so much, everybody. We're 2 minutes over. I'm very sorry. As I always say at the end of these webinars, thank you very much for joining us. Go and put the kettle on, have a cup of tea before you look at emails. Have a good day. Stay safe. Wash your hands. See you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See ya.